It's such a great point because I've taught quite a few places, from some of the wealthier institutions to some of the poorer ones, and they would call us like those of us in higher ed as working in like a bastion of elitism. But many of my students were homeless or working out of cars, so these were hardly some rich Ivy League students. And it also makes me think of another group that I'd like to hear you talk about as well when these culture wars talk about institutions being elite, which are the adjuncts, right? They have this idea of these professors with endless amounts of money and education and connections, and they're mocking the working class from their ivory tower. But can you talk a little bit about that? Because that's not the reality of what it's like to be a faculty member in most institutions of higher education, right?
Sure. Yeah. So you're right that within the attack on higher education generally is also a demonization of professors, and I would say a demonization of the humanities. And so let's start with talking about who professors are, and then maybe we can talk about the humanities at some point also during this interview. So people like there's like this long and like some of the stereotypes we have about higher education are like from pre-World War II. They're really old, and they relate to kind of this assumption of like pipe smoking, jacket wearing, predominantly men, white men, kind of holding forth in lectures and teaching that way. And there are certainly elements of that still exist. There are also elements that there are ways in which professors who acted like that have shaped, the profession as it's evolved since then. But the fact is that most faculty who are hired in the United States are not paid to do research because they're at teaching colleges and because they're at community colleges. They often are required to teach at best 3 and often 4 or 5 classes per term. And these are the full-time faculty. And sometimes they get out of it through some level of service, but there aren't many expectations of them to publish because even their institutions admit, and their institutions often don't admit when their working conditions are bad, but even their institutions admit, wow, it would be a lot to ask you to teach hundreds of students per term and also write a book. And so straight from the jump, you say, oh, what is the cultural power of this supposed elite? For the majority of professors in higher education, it's mainly in the classroom. Um, and then you say, well, what are they teaching? Well, most people who attend community college are engaging in intro classes, but there's a long history of vocational education in community colleges. It's not well known that even going back to the GI Bill immediately after World War II, which provided public funding for veterans to go to school, which sort of did 2 things. It promoted workforce training, and it also reduced pressures on the economy to reabsorb all these returning soldiers from World War II, so there wouldn't be as much of a recession, and hopefully wouldn't be kind of the right wing backlash that happened like after World War One. So you have this public spending on higher education that subsidizes the attendance of working class people who otherwise never would have gone. And what do? Yeah, some go to Harvard, but most actually go to community colleges at the time and get vocational degrees. They upskill, right? And some of it is just getting the certificate that goes with stuff they trained for in the military already. Some of it is more. But also, yes, people do get access to liberal arts education that they wouldn't have had before. So and then the more that the US government spent on providing grants and loans for students to go to school, the more that that's been the case. But it still holds that a lot of people don't want a 4-year college degree, or if they do, they want a vocational degree. And that's reflected in the kind of majors we've seen, even before 2008. And since 2008, you see an even greater shift in student attendance going into vocational certificate and degree programs and majors like STEM. I will also say criminology, policing, like kind of law enforcement management, health sciences, and things like that. places where people think it's either a growth economy or they might have some leverage to get a job after. And then we take into account the fact that the culture wars rhetoric I described at the beginning is not new. So, like, I was thinking before this podcast, where on earth do I even start? Like, is it Reagan? Is it Nixon? Is it like, we could go further back. We could say William F. Buckley writes about how Yale is a place of communist atheists in the early 50s. We could go back to the second Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s and 1930s that was literally burning crosses in higher education, on higher education campuses, because they thought the promotion of like labor rights or social science or different kinds of reforms of capitalism were basically un-American and communist. And so even at UCLA, where I teach, a combination of Klan members from the community and fraternity brothers and other reactionaries like literally burned a cross on the college campus because one communist was attending school and had been suspended, and she was fighting to get back enrolled in the school. So like this history goes back a long time. But one thing we can say is that starting with Ronald Reagan's campaign for governor in 1966, when he explicitly ran against the Berkeley free speech movement and its sort of and its aftermath, that when conservative politicians said that these elite schools are out of control, they're indoctrinating students, and the students are misbehaving and they're engaging in activities that are un-American, they didn't just clamp down on those schools. So what Reagan did when he came into office in California in 1967 is he famously not only tried to fire communist instructors and respond to student protests with police, but he also increased tuition and introduced tuition, I should say, to the entire public California education system. That's a strange response if you think about it to one school. Most schools in California were not like UC Berkeley. They were not elite. They were not in turmoil. In the mid 1960s, they would be more so as a result of growing activism in response to the Vietnam War. But Reagan, before that activism is even really taking off, even though you could say that it's spreading, he's introducing disciplinary measures to reduce access to higher education, as well as to try to link work to deserving of school, with the idea being that if you're busy working and or accumulating debt, that you'll have less time to protest, or you'll think, oh, this is a special thing I'm getting from the government, and therefore I won't engage in protest as much. But that kind of bait and switch where you say, oh, the culture wars, like the left really doesn't respect ordinary people. And then you pivot and you get in government and you start reducing ordinary people's access to higher education, including vocational education. Like it just has been going on for a while. And and so this leads to your question about professors. And I'm sorry I took so long to get there. This is just me being a faculty member, and I apologize to your audience as well. But like
No, we love the history here. Keep going.
all these schools that are mostly teaching schools have been underfunded since their inception, as Ellie Tandy Shermer has reminded me and other scholars. They also have been intentionally kind of underfunded since the 1970s. And demand for higher education has gone up because both political parties have not supported labor rights and have not supported social welfare, so that increased global competition in the economy led to people being dislocated from their jobs or having less bargaining power after just getting a high school degree. They're left on their own. They go into school, and guess what? Their politicians don't want to pay for them to attend school anymore, and they want to increase tuition. And so, what is one of the ways that schools have responded to that? By hiring more temp low wage teachers. And so, it's not that all schools always had full time teachers. There were maybe a few elite ones that did, but even then, you had a few temporary teachers replacing teachers who'd passed away or left or were on sabbatical or whatever. But this position of the temporary instructor went from being like something like 25% of the college teaching workforce or 30% or 40%, whatever. It now is like in the range of 70% of all college instruction is done by temporary instructors who don't have academic freedom. And then the disproportionate number are teaching in community colleges where the teaching conditions are worst. So in California, where most of them are represented by unions, you still have most college faculty with little to no job security, earning $3,000 or a little bit more per 16-week class, capped at 3 classes per term, meaning that they're averaging roughly 20,000 bucks a year if they're teaching 120 students per term with little to no health benefits. They're having to stack those students, so stack those classes. So now they're teaching at multiple campuses or they have side jobs. And so now you're in a situation where they may be teaching 10 classes or they're teaching mega classes, and their ability to provide individualized attention to their students to facilitate their skill development is grossly undermined. And this is a direct effect of the assault on higher education rhetorically and politically as an institution, just at a time when demand has increased and access has increased to women and people of color. And so not only do you have a majority of students wanting degrees that will help them in the job market, not only are most schools community colleges and teaching colleges, but you also have most faculty are overworked and underpaid teachers. And and so those of us who actually work in this industry, when we hear about how radical and out of control the faculty are, it's almost kind of baffling because while there may be some of us who are like, we wish, we wish that our schools were like the right describes, the fact is they really aren't. Like most of us are downwardly mobile professionals who have chosen for a variety of reasons, often out of passion for teaching or some need for workplace autonomy, to teach under adverse conditions to support working people, disproportionately working and working poor people, in their hope to upskill and also reflect on the social conditions that they live in and develop different ways of understanding that and developing their voice. And so, like, this system is so different than what people describe that you have to imagine now that we're at a point, and this is very recent, that the majority of people in the United States have attended some college. You have to imagine that some of the people that support this discourse, just like government employees are saying, yeah, the state is too big, like there must be some people who have attended college and they're like, oh, the college that the right is attacking as elitist, that's not my college. That's not my experience. And so it's this bizarro world where like you have this underfunded, undersupported teaching infrastructure that people want to participate in, and they resent that there's tuition and that they're going into debt. And there's bipartisan support for public schools, especially community colleges. And then the discourse is sort of used to like prevent that will from coming into being, by making it seem that, well, while you're deserving, there's some people who aren't deserving. So we really can't provide free public college until we take care of this other problem. And in the meantime, things just get worse and worse.
Hey, Detoxers. Thanks for tuning in to the Disinfo Detox. If you're enjoying the content, head over to nolanhigdon.substack.com for full access to the podcast as well as other original essays. Want to support the Detox? Consider becoming a paid subscriber. You'll get early and exclusive access to interviews, podcasts, essays, and more. If a subscription's not in the cards for you right now, no worries. Just like, share, subscribe, comment, and follow. It helps grow the audience and spread the word. Until next time, stay sharp, stay skeptical, and keep detoxing the disinfo.